Einen schönen guten Tag. Zurück aus der Sommerpause begrüßen wir Sie ganz herzlich aus der Hessischen Landesvertretung in Berlin für eine weitere Diskussion in unserer Reihe One Click to Europe. Was bedeutet das Coronavirus für die Europäische Union? Mein Name ist Christoph von Marschall. Ich bin der diplomatische Korrespondent des Tagesspiegels, der hier in Berlin erscheint. Europa verändert sich und auch wir haben das Gesicht dieser Reihe etwas verändert. In den bisher 19 Folgen hatten wir jeweils eine Botschafterin oder einen Botschafter zu Gast. Nun, in der 20. Folge sind es zwei. Die Botschafter Maltas, Vanni Xuereb, und der Botschafter Ungarns, Péter Györkös. Wir versprechen uns von diesem neuen Format, dass wir die Vielfalt der Interessen und Meinungen unter den 27 EU-Staaten besser abbilden. Nehmen wir nur mal das Thema Migration. Malta ist nach Fläche und Bevölkerung das kleinste EU-Land. 520.000 Einwohner, 316 Quadratkilometer. Auf diesem kleinen Inselstaat im Süden landen viele Migranten, die über das Mittelmeer kommen. Malta hofft auf solidarische Verteilung der damit verbundenen Lasten. Ungarn ist mit 10 Millionen Bürgern und einer boomenden Wirtschaft ein Mittelgewicht in der Union. Es lehnt die Forderung nach Quoten für die Aufnahme von Migranten ab. Beim deutschen Wunsch nach einer Harmonisierung der Steuersätze sieht es anders aus. Da ist eher Malta skeptisch. Wir wollen auch über die Lehren für die EU aus Afghanistan reden und über die Zukunftskonferenz samt den unterschiedlichen Vorstellungen, ob und wie sich die Europäische Union verändern soll. Wir werden nachher Englisch sprechen. Zunächst begrüßt sie wie gewohnt Hessens Staatsministerin für Bundes- und Europaangelegenheiten, Lucia Puttrich.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer, die politische Sommerpause ist vorbei und wir führen unsere Veranstaltungen der Hessischen Landesvertretung fort. Wir leben in einer spannenden Zeit, wir haben die Sommerferien hinter uns und wir alle hoffen, dass wir mit dem Coronavirus gut umgehen können und dass Menschen ihre Freiheiten sehr bald alle wieder zurückgewinnen werden. In der Bundespolitik sieht man daran, dass wir uns mit diesem Thema beschäftigen, dass in der nächsten Woche das Infektionsschutzgesetz noch geändert werden soll und wir uns nicht mehr nur nach den Inzidenzen ausrichten. Was wir in den letzten Monaten gemacht haben, war immer wieder den Blick in andere europäischen Staaten zu richten. Und deshalb haben wir auch diese Serie aufgelegt, was bedeutet das Coronavirus für die Europäische Union. Heute haben wir zu Gast den maltesischen Botschafter und den ungarischen Botschafter. Und wieder wird die Veranstaltung in bewährter Weise moderiert von Dr. von Marschall, dem politischen Korrespondenten des Tagesspiegels. Wir wollen den Blick richten in diese beiden Länder. Wie gehen sie mit dem Coronavirus um? Welche Freiheiten kann man dort zurückgeben? Wie weit ist es mit dem Impfen dort? Und wie geht man auch mit den finanziellen und wirtschaftlichen Folgen um? Wir haben in der Europäischen Union beschlossen, dass wir viel Geld in die Hand nehmen werden für die Aufarbeitung der Folgen innerhalb der Europäischen Union. Und auch das interessiert uns. Wie wird das Geld investiert? Wie wird es ausgegeben? Und wie solidarisch sind wir miteinander? Und wenn wir von Solidarität reden, dann reden wir nicht nur bezüglich der Solidarität, wenn es um das Coronavirus geht. Wir reden auch um die Solidarität bei aktuellen politischen Entwicklungen. Wir kommen nicht umhin, auch die Situation in Afghanistan kurz zu betrachten und auch über das Thema Migration zu sprechen. Wenn wir über das Thema Migration sprechen, dann ist es ein schwieriges Thema. Aber gerade in der heutigen Zeit, in dieser schwierigen Phase, müssen wir zeigen, dass wir als Europäische Union stark sind, dass wir geschlossen sind und dass wir einen gemeinsamen Willen haben. Ich glaube, im Moment ist es besonders bedeutend zu zeigen, welche Rolle die EU zukünftig in der Weltpolitik spielen will und spielen kann. Und da gibt es viele Themen, die man noch streifen könnte, sei es das Thema Rechtsstaatlichkeit oder. Ich weiß, dass unser Moderator Dr. von Marschall wieder eine hervorragende Leitung der Diskussion führen wird und ich freue mich mit Ihnen auf eine spannende Veranstaltung. Also herzlich willkommen und interessante Einblicke.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Puttrich. Erlauben Sie mir bei der Gelegenheit noch mal daran zu erinnern, dass Sie diese Gespräche auch auf YouTube und Twitter verfolgen können unter dem Stichwort Hessen in Berlin und Europa. And now let me switch to English. Both of our guests have a long experience in European affairs. Vanni Xuereb studied European law and theology, which is an interesting combination. Maybe we should also ask him to which degree the future of Europe is a question of faith. He came to Berlin in 2020. Before he was ambassador in Madrid, in Spain. He served as advisor of the Catholic Church in Malta for EU affairs, and he promotes equal rights for women and the LGBTI community. Quite some contrast to Péter Györkös. He serves already 6 years here in Berlin. He studied international relations in Moscow, got his PhD in economics in Budapest after the transition to democracy in 1992, served as ambassador in Croatia and many years in Brussels. Now, when we talk about a crisis of Europe, or more generally, a crisis of the West in these days, most people don't think about Corona, but rather of the tragic developments in Afghanistan. If we take Western democracies altogether, North America, Europe, Japan, they command almost half of the global GDP. But they were not able to succeed with their plans in Afghanistan, a country that commands not even 1% of world GDP. That should tell us something about the might, or rather the limits of power of the so-called rich and mighty West, and in our case also the limits in Europe. What are these lessons about limited power, Ambassador Györkös?
First of all, nur ein Satz in Deutsch, wenn Sie das mir erlauben. Vielen Dank für die Einladung, weil mein Land mit Hessen ganz eng verbunden ist, nämlich der Gründer von Hessen war das Urenkelkind des ungarischen Königs. So insofern ist es für uns immer eine besondere Ehre, hier sein zu können. So, sorry for that, but I guess that if we are talking about the future of Europe, we have to be clear what our joint past means and what is the mission. Look, for sure, now what happened in Afghanistan in the recent weeks and the bulk in minutes, basically, it's a lesson we have to analyze, but some lessons are already learned. If you listen to the statements in Berlin, in Washington, and publications. I guess that if I might abuse our slogan from 2011 as Hungary assumed the presidency of the Council of the European Union, our logo said Strong Europe. And the argumentation was that Europe is still rich but weak. So when you say rich and mighty, I challenged the mighty, the second component. And it's now absolutely visible. So what we say, Europe should be in a position to show strengths, not to let a word develop called G2, but be JX, where Europe is a player. We are not yet there.
G2, you mean just the US and China as global powers?
Absolutely, absolutely. JX, we have to be frank and sincere with ourselves. What is the share of Europe on GDP, on patents, on innovation, and on military strengths? And in that context, I present my country here in Germany, not necessarily with success, as one of the most reliable in Europe when it goes about the positioning in the coming decades for the future of our people within the European Union and how far we can be helpful in many aspects overall in the world.
So just one follow-up. When you say military strength of Europe, what would you have in mind?
The own capacity and capabilities. It's now, again, somehow in the air, European army. And then I would like to recall that after the Brexit, it was the Hungarian Prime Minister in July 2016 who suggested to take back on the agenda the issue of a European army. And here it is not about Article 5 of NATO treaty. It's about capacities and capabilities of Europe if the United States and the United Kingdom are not interested, not ready, not willing to act. And there are very clearly definable regions in the world where the primary responsibility of Europe is there. This is the Western Balkans, Middle East, and North Africa. Secondly, here was migration mentioned, and I guess we will talk a lot about migration, also as a lesson whether to learn or not. If I am listening in the German media to the Luxembourg foreign minister, then I have my doubts whether everybody has learned the lessons, but still we are on the right track, I guess, a bit slower than expected. And then we say the capacity to protect our external borders, to have a ring of friends all around Europe, to export our humanitarian aid, and the fourth component, to have military capacities. Hungary was among the many few countries which supported the then idea of the German defense minister, AKK, about safety zones in Syria, in northern Syria. And now we are among those who are there to create capacities to protect the Kabul airport. So that's what I mean if we are talking about military capacities, not about nuclear deterrence.
Interesting idea that, for example, Europe should be able to maintain the security at the Kabul airport for flights, evacuation flights, even if the US are going out. Ambassador Xuereb, let's get to this first question back to you. What are your ideas about the possibilities, but also the limits of European power? And since you, as somebody who studied theology and responsibility, I may add, responsibility means, in short, to help where you are able to help and to refrain from intervention where your power has limits, because you might make a bad situation even worse. So what is, from your point of view, Europe able to do in places like Afghanistan, and where are the limits?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that we emphasize that the success, I mean, we look at the EU and speak about failures, but there have been many successes. And let's not forget that, that by and large, the European Union has been a very successful experiment, and a very and therefore let's look even towards the future, keeping in mind that there is a lot on which we can build, on which we can build upon, and that we have been successful where we have managed to do what we can do better together. So if there are things that we can do better, and where we can be, even as individual countries, more effective if we are doing it together. I mean, I come from the smallest country in the European Union. When there was the debate about whether we should join the European Union, the whole argument was, well, listen, we have just become independent. We became independent in 1964. So are we going to give up our independence so soon after we have obtained it? But in effect, being in the European Union for a number of years now has actually proved that our sovereignty has taken a stronger relevance. Our sovereignty, defined within the context of the EU and the institutions, has actually strengthened our capacity to have a voice in issues like Afghanistan, in issues like the other issues in which the EU is dealing with on a constant basis. So effectively, I think it is important that we do look at ourselves and use even lessons learned from what has happened in Afghanistan over the past weeks, to see how we can be and where we can be more effective. As an interlocutor, I mean, this is something which is very much at heart to my country, as an interlocutor for dialogue. So Malta tries to stress that by slamming doors and by cutting off contacts, we do not obtain solutions. So certainly the EU can assume a role where it is an interlocutor for dialogue, and that it can, of course, we stick to our values, we do not renounce on our values, and it is important, although we don't always agree what these values are, but I think, you know, where it comes to respect for human rights, for respect for the rule of law, and whatever, I mean, for the basic foundations of what constitutes, of course, these values, we are in agreement. And this is where we should be pushing more.
May I also ask you a follow-up?
Yeah.
How would you react to Péter Györkös's idea that we now have to work on the idea of a European army, which might be responsible for stability in places like the Western Balkans, North Africa, which is very much on your focus as well? What is Malta's position? Is
well, of course,
army?
We are in a different situation because we are one of the few neutral countries in Europe, so in the European Union. So it's Malta, it's Austria, it's Ireland, it's Sweden. So there are a number of countries within the European Union that have, and therefore for us we would need to obviously discuss it with our partners in the European Union, discuss any proposals that are put on the table, and so long as they are in respect for our constitution and neutrality, of course, we would be willing, I think, to discuss proposals that would enhance the capacity. Of course, not as a belligerent force, but as a peacekeeping and a peace-promoting force in various regions of the world.
After the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we expect to see two types of migration. The West feels a responsibility to rescue the so-called Ortskräfte, the locals who helped Western forces during their stay. And we expect a migration wave, people who fear for their lives under the Taliban and try to emigrate and come through different countries to Europe. Ambassador Xuereb, as I said in the introduction, Malta is a small country in the Mediterranean, taking already for years a huge burden of migration. What are your expectations, what the EU as a whole should do to share this burden? Will we see a similar wave like in 2015 from Afghanistan, like we saw then from Syria, Afghanistan and other places?
Well, of course, this is all being discussed and at the moment. But fundamentally, you know, the problems remain the same. I mean, why do people decide to move? I mean, in this case, we know the reason, and it's very clear why people want to leave Afghanistan. But then, you know, the whole idea of where to move in Europe, assisting, in this case, not much the countries of origin, but again, we have to engage, and we can't just put our heads in the sand and say, oh, Afghanistan, you know, we don't recognize the government and etc., and I will not deal with the government. I mean, there's an element of realpolitik in it too, but we will see how that will develop. But also with the countries that are immediately bordering Afghanistan, of course, we're talking of countries like Iran, countries like Turkey.
Pakistan has already 2 or 3 million refugees from Afghanistan.
I think it is our duty to engage with these countries and to see how Europe can play a role even here in basically dealing with a humanitarian. This is basically a migration is a humanitarian, of course, when it is something that is the result of causes that are genuine. I mean, our worry is when we have situations like what we face in the central Mediterranean route of human smuggling, of people who are making it a business. I mean, I read an article it was in Die Welt a couple of days ago about this. You know, even it raises some alarm bells, even in terms of collusion between NGOs and human smugglers. And this is something that we are very worried about, and the fact that there are people who are making it a business, and that are people who are actually promoting it. So this is why we also want this discussion to take place in a European context and to have a European solution.
Let's ask the same question to Ambassador Györkös. Hungary, of course, has different thoughts about the right migration policy, but let's start with the first question at hand. Do you expect a new wave from Afghanistan now, as we have seen in 2015, or is it different? And what are your and Hungary's idea how we deal with migration waves after these collapses?
The issue is on the table, the challenge is on the table, and the risks are on the table. Because there are all the components, push and pull factors. Mm-hmm. Our response is the same like in 2015. And even if Hungary is not an island, it's an landlocked country, even now the pressure on our external borders, which are your external borders, is enormous. It increased compared to last year by 60% so far. Mm-hmm. These are Frontex statistics, not Hungarian statistics, Frontex statistics. The number of illegal migration attempts is over 60,000 this year. What we say, and what we have been saying since 2015, first, just let us have once for an hour a big picture of the world. Millions, hundreds of millions of people are suffering due to war, due to famine, due to lack of drinking water, climate consequences. Europe should answer this question, and our answer is that we could not solve these problems on European soil. We should not import problems which are not solvable on European ground, but we have to export our assistance and help. So this is our first starting point. Second, we should be in a position to protect our external borders. As long as we are not able to demonstrate this, the smugglers will always find a ways where to make a try. Should it Ceuta, Melilla, should it be Malta, should it be the Greek border, or now what we see, they are not only
Lithuania and Poland.
Not only smugglers who are the money, but by Lukashenko, these people are
leader of Belarus.
Weaponized. So as long as we are not really able to show a waterproof system of protecting our external borders, we will be always challenged. Third point, of course, it goes only if we have a ring of friends and partners. We should not let them alone. We have to cooperate with them and with the neighbors of our neighbors, like in concentric circles. This is the third pillar. The first pillar, to export our assistance, to help there, because there our assistance is much more valuable. €1 here is €10 there, and it's, I guess, much more human to have their 10,000s, like trying to distribute hundreds here. And the fifth, which I mentioned, that sometimes you could not deliver this humanitarian assistance without military capacities. Because if we are opting for disembarkation platforms in Northern Africa by helping Malta, Italy, then we have to have military capacities, otherwise the smugglers and other terrorist groups can challenge us and undermine our concept. So this is our concept. We are representing this, having been representing this for 6 years, and I see that we are converging. We are not yet there, so sometimes far from that, but I am rather optimistic that the common sense is prevailing.
I would now like to get to the so-called Zukunftskonferenz. The European Union is a conundrum for many observers. Its membership countries are doing something which seems very strange to other nation states. Nobody else is doing it voluntarily. They transfer power, national power, from the nation state to a supranational organization. For many outside of the EU, this looks like an undertaking against the natural law of state power, because normally you try to keep your power and not give it away. The counter-argument is, of course, no nation state in Europe has enough power to go it alone and still be successful in a globalized world. Now, if we are a political union in the European Union, some things have to change in order to make it more effective. The so-called Conference on the Future of the EU is discussing the necessary changes, and our host, Madame Puttrich, takes part in these debates. Ambassador Györkös, we were at this point before, trying to make a big leap forward towards deeper integration. You were the chief negotiator for Hungary in the Constitutional Convent with the task to write a constitution for the European Union. But they missed the goal. The United Kingdom was not happy with the approach. France and the Netherlands rejected the document in 2015 in separate referendums. Given this history and the very different ideas for the future, what would you like to see as an outcome of the new conference? More integration? More competences transferred to Brussels by the nation states? Or, on the contrary, a reflection that the EU should continue to be what it is, a very successful common market and a federation of sovereign states with rather limited competences for the EU institutions like the Commission and the Parliament?
You mentioned that I made some professional and personal experiences in this domain, how to engage into constitutional reforms. Whether the conference, the future of Europe, is a constitutional process, it's not unclear, because there were at least 12 member states signalizing very clearly that please don't touch the treaty. In the whole history of the European Union, it was a history of deepening and enlarging. It was like a zip. Once enlarging, once deepening, once enlarging, once deepening. And before the biggest enlargement, 2004, there was a strong wish from the founding fathers, in particular from the Benelux countries, to have a deepening which gives us guarantees that when so many member states are arriving, then it would undermine the convergence and the deepening process. And it happened what happened, that two founding fathers rejected this treaty. Just be on the safe side, that were not the new member states, not the newcomers, not these Easterners. They were two founding fathers which rejected this.
France and the Netherlands,
Yes,
just
yeah.
to repeat it.
So that something happened, and that's why I'm always saying that now there are so many analyses, articles about the legacy of Chancellor Merkel, starting with the financial crisis. No, she arrived at a moment when we had an institutional crisis caused by the referendum in France and the Netherlands. And she managed this then afterwards, financial crisis, migration crisis, corona crisis. So it should be clear that it's a question which is challenging for all member states. Mm-hmm. The Hungarian concept was from the very beginning rather simple, because my Maltese colleague mentioned the question of sovereignty. Mm-hmm. It is part of the Hungarian constitution, not since 2010, but much longer, that Hungary is not giving up sovereignty. Hungary is exercising some part of our sovereignty together with the other member states, and where the competences are there with the community institutions. Mm-hmm. So this is our Wahrnehmung, perception about sovereignty and competences. Now, what we say, it's let's give up this ideological approach that more Europe is better. Sometimes we need more Europe, sometimes we need less. And we discussed rather broadly the issue of European defense. It is the hardcore of sovereignty. Nevertheless, the Hungarian Prime Minister was the first after Brexit raising this issue at European level. Or take corona consequences, European sovereignty, production capacities, innovation capacities, European patents, and the same applies for competitiveness, because the security and competitiveness are the two areas where we need more Europe. But sometimes we need less. And whether this conference can channel this, because I'm afraid that we are more in a political and ideological arena. Let it see. We published our views, they are on the table, we are ready to discuss, and let's see.
But the first reflex is we do not need necessarily automatically more Europe.
No
Europe.
automaticity.
Okay, that is clear. Ambassador Xuereb, what is the position of Malta on the Zukunftskonferenz?
Well, I think we have to recall that I know the Constitutional Treaty included the motto of the European Union, united in diversity. And I think if we have to keep these two fundamental points in mind when we are discussing the future, that we are united, but we have to respect the diversity. Keeping in mind that we are a union of sovereign member states. And I think no one of the 27 wants to lose sight of the fact that we are a union of sovereign states. And this is where I agree with my Hungarian colleague, that we are sharing our sovereignty in areas where it is best that we work together, that we are more effective. I mean, the biggest success, the single market. So the EU has been highly successful. Nobody there, of course, we can see how we could be doing things better and improving our capabilities. But there are no doubts that there are sectors where the EU experiment and the EU, the community, perhaps the older way we used to call ourselves, the European community, communities was more reflective of what we aspire to be. Now, when we talk about deepening integration, well, let's see. But the important thing to keep in mind is always this, that let's do together what we can do better together. Where things are done better, this is the principle, one of the fundamental principles of the EU, subsidiarity. Where it is best that things are done at the lowest level possible, not even member state level, regional level, local level, then let's do it at that level. So let's not do things together just for the sake of doing it together, just for the sake of having, the European flag. But where we can be more effective, and this is certainly something where we are ready to discuss with our partners, to examine and to see where and this is where I am agreeing with my Hungarian colleague, of course, that where it is better that we have more Europe, but there might be some areas where we decide, listen, this is an area where it's better that there is a bit less of Europe. And again, let's define what we mean by Europe, and keep in mind that the institutional setup in the EU does reflect, in a way, so the central authority, the Commission, but then you have the Parliament, the reflection of the will of the people, and you have the Council, which is an EU institution, but representing the member state level. So we have to always, even in the institutional set of the EU, keep in mind that the EU is not just what the Commission is proposing, but there's a whole process that has to also take into account, just like a federal state, like Germany has the Bundestag and the Bundesrat, to reflect the popular will, but also to reflect the will of the lander at that level.
I think it is good that you reminded all of us that there are European institutions which are always interested to get more power and more competences. That is especially the Commission and the Parliament. But there's a third institution, that is the Council, which represents the nation states. So we have this different interests. Also represented at least in the third institution in the Council. But I would like to follow up with one detailed question. Do we need to end the principle of consensus in the common foreign and security policy and switch to majority vote? Ambassador Xuereb, and then the same question.
Well, if you ask
and
me,
here rather a short answer and not a...
If you tell me in all aspects, I would say no. What I would say is that there may be areas where we could, consider this, but definitely not just throw out unanimity as a principle, throw it out completely. I think there have to be instances where the principle of unanimity must remain. Because there will be instances where member states would need to retain at the end of the day, and not be coerced, let's put it this way, into doing something that they would not feel comfortable doing.
Have you any special field where you say, here maybe we could do majority vote and here rather not? Or is it more the general thought at the moment you're feeling?
Well, I mean, if we are talking, for instance, of development aid, aspects where perhaps it is not so fundamental that you have the 27, the consensus of the 27. But if we are talking of the broader international picture, I think that is one area where we have to have, because at the end of the day, one has to respect that we are, and this is why I say so. Until we decide to make the EU something different, it remains a union, a community of sovereign member states.
I think it's clear, and of course we Germans also have fields where we wouldn't budge to majority vote. We have a special history with the Jewish state, with Israel, and certainly we would not say we give up our national responsibility for Israel just because the European Union decides by majority vote how we have to treat the Middle East conflict. But Ambassador Györkös, also to you the question with the request for a short answer. Do we have to switch to majority vote in foreign security policy or rather not?
The short answer is no. The bit longer, why no? You mentioned Israel. You won't be never alone when it goes about protecting Israel and defending Israel. But just look, the logic and the structure of our common European Union is the most beautiful one from the very beginning, that there are very big states and very small member states. And how to balance between them. It was from the very beginning so, West Germany, Italy, France and Luxembourg. Now it's Malta and the United Germany on the other hand. And to coordinate, to converge, this is the beauty of that. That's why we are unique in the world. That's why we are not the United States. Point two, look, you mentioned Germany can be also left alone. And they should, even the Germans should consider what if there is a vote about Nord Stream 2 in the Council.
For example.
But for Germany, it will be always rather easy to organize the blocking minority. 2-3 phone calls and you have the blocking minority. For Malta, it would be rather challenging when it goes about substantial interest. And the fourth point, which is, because the issue came up now also in the German campaign, on one hand, at the first trial of the three candidates about foreign policy, that was an issue. And there was a convergence, a consensus that it should be. Of course, but there are 26 other member states. But on the other hand, a party represented in the German parliament suggested a so-called veto ministry, which goes clearly against the German constitution. So here it's an issue from the other side.
That was on climate policy.
Against the German constitution, nevertheless opting for veto rights, while in our case, the unanimity is a constitutional right of my country when it goes about Israel. So it's also, but so that's why, of course, European dossiers are always interlinked with the German domestic politics. But it's a very interesting example how far this unanimity or veto right is interpreted by the same political force.
So I think it's clear you are both rather skeptical about the switch in their exceptions. We got that. I would like to go to the sorry for interrupting, to go to the next point just with considerations of our time. There is a fundamental conflict going on in the European Union, whether values are a constitutional fundament of the EU and what these values mean. That, I think, is the important point. For example, the EU accuses Poland and Hungary of breach of contract when it comes to the independence of the judiciary. And of course, Germany has also some breach of contracts problems with the European Union. But before you answer, Ambassador Györkös, I would like to add that there is more criticism in other fields, like the principle of the free media. Malta is accused of toning down the murder of a journalist who reported on the involvement of high politicians in corruption and other scandals. Now, Ambassador Györkös, Hungary rejects these accusations and says that the old EU members in the West and the Northwest are using double standards when it comes to breach of contract questions. Please elaborate for our viewers. What is behind this accusation or counter
Quickly,
argument?
piece by piece. You mentioned freedom of press.
And in your case, it's especially also the independence of the judiciary in Poland.
Let's start because it's easier.
Start wherever you want.
Let's start with the independence of judiciary, because that was part of the constitutional changes in Hungary in 2011-12. But we solved this issue with the Commission and with the European Court of Justice. Since 2013, there is no issue in Hungary. We had one major project, by the way, because we wanted, based on the German model, introduce in Hungary the administrative courts, the Verwaltungsgerichte. But there was such a approach, we said, okay, we abandon this project. But since 2013, it's not an issue in Hungary. I don't know what about, are talking this nice Orbán Fresser in the European Parliament. Point two, media freedom. Yes, there was a change in the structure of the media landscape, but I am asking everybody who is challenging us, are you speaking and reading Hungarian? Have you read this morning the Hungarian newspapers? Have you listened to the radio stations? Have you been watching TV? So please, it's not only ignorance or different interpretation, but sometimes my feeling is that those who are for freedom of speech, it's a very unilateral approach. They say freedom of speech applies only for Mr. Asselborn in the German media, and not for the Hungarians.
The Luxembourg foreign minister, just for those
but so it means that please be fair with us. Let's see what the facts are. Let's listen to us. Let's discuss it. And as long as you mentioned already the institutions and the EU treaty, what is within the treaty the fundamental task and mandate of the European Commission? It is being guardian of the treaties and the right of initiative. What we have seen 2014, after the Barroso Commission left, a statement of President Juncker, from now on it's a political commission. By the way, it's breaching the European treaty. And on political basis, you could not solve, at least not solve easily, legal issues. Because when it went and proceeded on a legal basis, we have been always partners to find a solution. And we stick to that, but not in the domain of political and ideological fights. And in all other, if you have any other dimensions, I am more than happy to answer them, and let's confront them, because this is the only way. Up to 2014, that was the community method. We solved all of them since then. And just, it's not for me to protect Malta, but you double standards and the killing of a journalist. I could not remember whether there was any Commission's procedure or discussion in the European Parliament on killing journalists in Western European member states.
You're talking now about the TV producer or the TV man in the Netherlands, which we just recently had, and nobody was doubting that the Netherlands are generally a country where they adhere to the values and the principles.
But there are
no, I just wanted to
criminal
translate.
structures, etc.
Yeah.
But
I
don't accuse the Netherlands, but I simply say that the Article 4 is about equality of member states. And this article is not applied in many cases. And you mentioned Article 2 about the basic values. It's true that certain elements are not clearly defined. Let's discuss it. And
just one
point. If there are constitutional unclarities, then we suggest explicitly to establish a court of competence consisting of members of the constitutional courts of the member states, because it's not to be solved in the European Parliament or at the intergovernmental conference.
Ambassador Xuereb, let's address the same question to you. Is the independence of judges and the free media everywhere in the EU on the same level? How do you respond to this case in Malta, also in Slovakia, where journalists have murdered, who had inquired whether high politicians are involved in corruption and other scandals? And of course, you can also, if you want, comment on the question whether there's a double standards, because in Malta and Slovakia there are these questions, and when it comes to the Netherlands and the murder of a journalist, we don't ask it in the same fundamental way. So what is your view on
double standards or not? I think that's a legitimate question that can be raised, but I won't attempt to answer it, because I think one has to look at one's own house and see what has happened and what has gone wrong. And of course, I mean, the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia, the journalist in question, was something
in
horrendous.
Malta.
It was horrendous. I mean, it was something despicable, something that shocked an entire society. I mean, we are still shocked until today. However, measures have been taken. I mean, first of all, part of the process actually led to the resignation of the Prime Minister. And we now have a new Prime Minister since January of last year. There has been an independent inquiry which has just ended its job, which has pointed fingers at how things were managed at various levels of the state. And the Prime Minister has committed himself to implementing the recommendations of this inquiry. There are people actually serving now jail sentences for having perpetrated the murder, and there is a person who will be undergoing. He has already been undergoing judicial proceedings in the criminal court, but now will face we have a trial system in our penal code provides that, and he has been indicted. So he has been charged, and he will face charges for being the person behind. Of course, when it comes to issues such as appointment of judges, again, we have been acting very much and working very closely both with the Commission and with the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe, and we have implemented changes such as for the appointment. The government has divested itself of it was the prerogative, the sole prerogative, and incidentally, we did not invent it ourselves. This was the constitution we negotiated with the British, and it is very much modeled on what the British do. So we very much have a system in place which is modeled on the British constitution. It's unwritten constitution. So the government has divested itself of the rights to appoint judges directly. The Prime Minister no longer, but there's a whole procedure how this is done, and it is starting to be implemented. If there are deficiencies in how the state institutions operate and function, of course, we are the first who want to fix it and want to make sure irrespective of everything else, because we are a modern democracy, and we want to ensure that at the end of the day, having a strong democracy which is functioning with institutions that are effective is not primarily in the interests of Europe, but primarily in the interests of our citizens. And it is the concerns of our citizens and providing the best system of government for our citizens, that is our paramount concern.
Just one information also for the time management of our viewers, since we have now changed a little bit the format, have two guests. We go a little bit longer than earlier when we had one guest here on the podium. Instead of 35 minutes, it's rather 50, 55. There are still two questions remaining we want to discuss. One is Corona, and the second is the upcoming German election. So Corona was the main challenge when we started this program in May 2020. So what is your judgment about the solidarity or the lack of such solidarity in the European Union? Would Malta, for example, have the same number of vaccination on its own, Ambassador Xuereb, if there was not the EU?
No. I mean, if you look at other small states in Europe, which are not part of the EU and therefore were not part of the common procurement system, you see that they have lagged behind significantly when it comes to vaccination. I mean, we have a vaccination rate of over 90% of our population is fully vaccinated.
Which is pretty high, because the European Union gave out new statistics
70,
today,
yeah.
And they counted when you extract minors from the whole counting. When you only start taking people above 18 years, then you land by 70% on average in the European Union, but it's very divided between the West,
yes,
which is much more vaccinated than the eastern part of the European Union. Sorry for interruption, but I just
and I mean, this is where then the issue of solidarity comes in. That I think that although because what we did was when it was decided how the vaccinations would be distributed, we decided to take up all doses possible. So we did not say, maybe we would need less or that. We said, whatever is going to be available for Malta, we are going to take. And this worked because we have our population which is vaccinated. And it is nowadays, it is thanks to that we have reopened our tourism. We are not immune from new cases. We have a number of new cases every day, but like other countries. But we have also put in a strict policy, for instance, where it comes, and this is where perhaps Europe could do a bit better together, because it has become confusing. So to what requirements do you need to enter Malta? What requirements do you need if you are traveling from Germany to Malta, traveling from Germany to Hungary, traveling from Germany to Sweden? I mean, it's a bit confusing.
From Germany to Germany?
Yes, as well. In one, I mean, I say this for ourselves. I mean, we are the only country, for instance, that does not recognize a recovery certificate in the EU. So 26 countries do, we do not. I mean, of course, our health authorities have their reasons. But it does become, I mean, why is it okay?
But generally, you are rather satisfied with the degree of solidarity in the corona crisis than you would say, no, it didn't work, solidarity.
Yes, I think so. I think we reacted too late, so we could have reacted better from the outset.
We recall that, but generally now. Of course, this question of solidarity has a lot of aspects. I just would like to add one more information about the statistics. When the European Union said 70% if we don't count the minors. If we count the minors, we are at 55% vaccination rate in the European Union, which is not enough to where we want to get. But Ambassador Györkös, what is your assessment? Did solidarity work or not? There's the vaccination points, there are the failures at the beginning, but there's also one question. We have this huge corona package, and the European Commission has to agree to the proposals how nation states want to spend the corona money. And for example, Hungary, Poland are not yet accepted the plan. So how do you assess solidarity, fair treatment in the European Union when it comes to the corona crisis?
Okay, let's divide in two parts, because of course they are interlinked, because the instrument originates, this new instrument originates from the corona crisis. but the conflict of the European Parliament with my country has a much longer history, and this is not a new instrument in their hands to blackmail my country. Whether it goes into the direction of fairness or solidarity, it's another issue.
Okay.
We were accused not to be solidar at the very beginning, because as in December last year, Brussels started to celebrate how beautiful Europe is reacting. Then we realized that in the first months of 2021, there would be a huge lack of supply.
Of vaccinations.
Of vaccination. Mm-hmm. And then we sent our experts to countries in the world where new vaccines have been authorized, to China and to Russia. And we authorized this, but not because they authorized themselves, but there were the Hungarian expertise and the Hungarian authorities. So they said, dafür stehe ich mit meinem Namen. Mm-hmm. So that was Hungary. And just to be on the safe side, the respective directive 2001/83, Article 5.2 says clearly that in critical situation, member states, authorities can act on their own. So it was not anti-solidarisch, not anti-solidar with Europe, and it helped us, in particular in the first months, to have one dynamic process. We are not so far as Malta, because there is in certain groups of the society resistance. Mm-hmm. It's also very interesting, just yesterday we discussed with one member of the German federal government this issue, and I'm coming from an eastern country, and he mentioned that how interesting it is that in general terms, in Eastern Germany, the readiness for being vaccinated is higher in East Germany than in Western Germany. But now in that case, it's the opposite. But we are well beyond 70%. And now the school year starts now, and there is a huge campaign now in the schools. And we got already more than 200,000 pupils vaccinated. But this is now the real challenge, that before, because now our figures are much lower than yours in Germany, as far as the fourth wave is concerned, but it will come ultimately. And experts say it could happen by late October. So now what is for us the real challenge to get there. And Hungary was the first country where we launched this strategy or this campaign for the boomer third vaccination. And so far, 310,000 people opted for the third vaccination.
Thank you. So we have almost exhausted our time, but since we have an election here in Germany in 25 days, I can't let you go without asking what you expect from the next federal government, especially when it comes to the common goals in the European Union. Are we Germans on the right track, or do we Germans risk to undermine the European Union with our very special German views on common interests like energy policy, minority rights, and so on? Ambassador Györkös from Hungary, so what would you wish the next government, federal government after the election, to continue or to change?
Look, it's up to the German electorate.
Of course, we will elect, but you might have your wishes.
As I see now, I try to explain to my capital what is going on, and to explain that there are at least 6-7 options as far as the next setup in Berlin is concerned. Germany is big, and Germany is powerful, even if many Germans don't like to hear this. And since Brexit, since 2016, this weight is much, much bigger, both in terms of geopolitics, in economics, in demography, and in responsibility. What I wish, and just to be frank with the Germans, they lost a big ally, the European Commission, because, as I mentioned, up to 2014, the European Commission was an honest broker, the guardian of the treaties. Since then, became a political institution, serving political, sometimes even ideological things. And for that reason, Germany's responsibility to keep together Europe, North and South, and in particular West and East, is much bigger. So if I have one wish, as the last GDR desk officer in the Hungarian Foreign Ministry, who had to write the diplomatic note about the opening of the border, which later on Chancellor Kohl called as the first brick of the wall, I can only wish that Germany sticks to this tradition to be this balancing power in Europe, which understands not only the West, but also the East. It's also within Germany a challenge, if I understand the German domestic processes correctly. And ultimately, such an election, in particular after 16 years of Chancellor Merkel, but anyway, it's always a change in the demographic structure. A new generation is coming, and I can only wish that they understand that there is life behind the former Iron Curtain, that this Iron Curtain has been constructed from the East, but also distracted from the East, that the new economic power is more and more in Central Europe, that the security of the Germans are protected in the Baltic states, the Schengen borders, your Schengen borders are protected on the Hungarian-Serbian border, that our countries are delivering, and they are, I guess, the same good Europeans as the Germans are.
Mm-hmm. It's good that you mentioned at the end also again that Central Eastern Europe is a boom region also for the German economy, generally for your economies in Poland, in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in the Slovak Republic. And you now, I think, are on track to get the next automotive investment after Audi, which is already there, Mercedes is in Hungary, and now BMW is also coming and investing there.
We have about 6,000 German companies in Hungary. Mm-hmm. From the very small to the very big ones. But I would make another, yes, beyond Germany and China, Hungary is the only country where all the big German car manufacturers are there, not only with production capacities.
I just want to mention it.
But just 2 days ago, there was a news on the German media, and it goes back to the first question, lessons of Afghanistan, that there was a question of the Linke caucus to the federal government about approval for arm exports during the legislative period. And surprise, surprise, on the top of the list stands my country. Because as Prime Minister Orbán 2016 suggested to recommend talk about European military capacities, he immediately said, and we have to develop not only our military, not only production, but also innovation in this field. So that's where I guess it's not only the automotive industry, because they are also claiming.
No.
It's very, very complex, but this kind of real network, zusammenwachsen, growing together.
I just wanted to mention it because we all know that when we talk about the European Union, European affairs, we have political, or the Commission, Brussels, has political problems with the neighbors, the next partners in the East, Poland, the 4 Visegrad countries, but the German economy is doing very, very well with the same partners, and that is not very many Germans know about this boom region at our eastern door. But the last word goes to you, Ambassador Xuereb. Malta, what would you expect or hope for where we continue, where the next German government continues or changes course?
Well, let me start by saying that Germany, both before we joined the European Union and since we have joined, has always been a good friend to Malta. So we have always found Germany supporting us, assisting us as was needed. So in that respect, certainly continuity. So, and we have no doubt that whatever the makeup of the new federal government that will emerge after September, that we will continue to enjoy this excellent relationship, that we have on a bilateral level. But also, and this is where I agree with my Hungarian colleague, that Germany continues to provide a strong leadership within the European Union. I think Germany is a trusted, and it is important that that Germany continues to enjoy that trust by all parties. I think it is even when it comes to acting as a broker. That the outgoing chancellor has proved this on several occasions, and we do hope that the incoming federal government will continue to show this leadership and this capacity to keep us all together, to help, not on its own, obviously, with all of us, and with the European institutions as well. Let's not make it a tug of war, a struggle of power and competencies. This is all the European Union, so let's try to make it work as best as we can.
Thank you. I am afraid we have to leave it there. Thank you to you, Ambassador Xuereb from Malta and Ambassador Györkös from Hungary. And you all are invited to the next discussion on Tuesday, September 14th. One Click to Europe. Was bedeutet das Coronavirus für die Europäische Union? Our guests will be the ambassadors of Croatia and Slovakia. And this will be again an interesting combination. All the best, stay healthy, and we are looking forward to seeing you again here.